Hello everyone, my name is Mervyn, and as usual, a huge hello and a huge thank you to anyone who is a new subscriber, to anyone who is just clicking on this video, or to anyone who is returning. Your viewership is very much appreciated. I am very grateful. So today I'll be doing a review and recommendation video on a new series, a new favorite series. And this might not be a surprise to you if you follow me on Instagram or if you've been keeping up with a certain video series. I've been participating with another booktuber, but it's about the Gormenghast Trilogy by Mervyn Peake. This is a work of classic fantasy. And in fact, the first book, Titus Grown, which came out in 1946, so it predates The Fellowship of the Ring, The Lord of the Rings, and it has proven to be influential to many other authors. With regards to its placement within the fantasy genre, as I was doing research for the Gormenghast Trilogy, I discovered that the series is considered to be part of a subgenre of fantasy called fantasy of manners. And as I was digging more into the term, I came across some certain characteristics that constitute fantasy of manners. So overall, when it comes to this subgenre, it's more about social hierarchy, social structures, and characters sort of navigating their way through these structures, or even perhaps fighting against them. Themes of fighting against self-constraint, and there's elements of the importance or the necessity of self-discovery. And when you take all these into consideration, you definitely see that the Gormenghast Trilogy does fall under these themes. This is considered fantasy, however, there isn't any magic system. There isn't any magical creatures. There isn't necessarily a element in this book, in this series, that you can kind of point to and say, oh, this is definitely fantasy. There's no dragons, there's no wizards, there's none of that here. However, when you do read the Gormenghast Trilogy, to use the parlance of our times, it is in the vibes. Like, you do get the vibe that this is a fantasy world. So moving on from the topic of genres and subgenres, I'll be talking about the premise to the first book, Titus Grown. So the events of this book are actually kicked off by the birth of Titus Grown, who is the heir to Gormenghast. Gormenghast being this very large, this immense castle and its surrounding lands. And Gormenghast has been ruled over by the House of Grown. The Earl of Gormenghast, his wife, their family, and the House of Grown has been ruling in Gormenghast for generations upon generations, and Titus is the most recent heir. Titus spends this book as an infant up to when he's 2 years old. So you're mainly following the various different inhabitants of Gormenghast Castle. One of the prominent ones being this character called Peake, who starts off as a kitchen boy, but a lot of the intrigue in this book surrounds how he's able to maneuver himself up the social ladder of Gormenghast. Now, when it comes to the trilogy as a whole, there are definitely certain elements that stand out to me and really help contribute to the fact that this is a new favorite series of mine. And I'm sure whenever you watch a video of people talking about the Gormenghast Trilogy, they're going to mention the atmosphere. And the atmosphere is definitely it's intrinsically tied to Mervyn Peake's prose. His prose is so evocative, incredibly evocative. These books, the Gormenghast Trilogy, are basically the most immersive books I have read so far in the year. I am very much a visual reader. I really enjoy it when an author goes into descriptions, describing the setting, the world, and allowing my mind's eye to construct what they're describing. As I was reading these books, the way to describe the experience, it's as if the words on the page disappeared, and all I saw in my mind's eye was just Gormenghast. This large, immense castle, its sprawling lands, the mountain range that, domineers everything. Another element that I really loved about the Gormenghast Trilogy was the world building, particularly the setting of Titus Grown and Gormenghast, which is Gormenghast Castle. The Grown family has been living in the Gormenghast Castle for generations. However, there are portions of Gormenghast that they are completely unfamiliar with, are uncharted territory, that they themselves could get lost in there. So this castle, which sort of dominates the lives of all these characters, remains a mystery to its inhabitants. I think a good example of this is that in Gormenghast, in the second book, this isn't a spoiler or anything, but it's discovered that there's basically an abandoned city within the bowels of Gormenghast. And we don't know why it's there. We don't know what happened to the inhabitants there, or they just moved out. There are several rooms that certain characters go to, like sneak into, that are completely and utterly abandoned. And the reason behind these rooms, what the purpose of that room was, it's been forgotten. Like, no one remembers it. There's even a tree that grows out of the side of the castle. And we don't know exactly what the purpose of that tree was exactly. Certain characters just use it for their own purposes, but the actual meaning or the reasoning behind it, it's lost. The impression I get when describing all of these is that you have, once again, an immense, grand castle, but it's more of a husk. There are a lot of details that kind of hint at its once grand past. But now what you have is a family living within the remnants. One of the videos that I watched about someone recommending Gormenghast, they did invoke the name Edgar Allan Poe, and I can definitely see why. There is just this inherent darkness within Gormenghast Castle. And then when you pair it with the decrepitness of it, all these rooms that have been forgotten, full of dust, or just basically breaking down, all these empty, long corridors that no one knows, no one knows where it leads to. There's just this uneasy sense of loneliness, darkness, even a bit of despair as well. Another thing that I really loved about the Gormenghast Trilogy were the themes that it explored. You have Gormenghast the castle, but then you also have Gormenghast the institution. And Gormenghast the institution is one that is run by rituals. Daily rituals. There always has to be an Earl of Gormenghast. He has to go through all these little rituals each and every day. He has to wear this certain color at this certain time. He has to perform this certain action. And it will continue on and on until he dies. And then there's a new Earl of Gormenghast, and it just continues on and on and on. And it creates a very stifling environment. Self-discovery, self-actualization are themes that are definitely present within the trilogy. Because Gormenghast, both the physical castle and the institution, is such a domineering force within the characters' lives that you have characters that want to establish a sense of self that is separate away from Gormenghast. However, it's a sort of like a tug and pull with it, because Gormenghast is part of their identity. And no matter how hard they try, they can't completely separate themselves from it. And then you have certain characters who accept the fact that their lives are in service to Gormenghast, to the institution. And so you have this struggle between these two factions, people who kind of want to break free from the restraint, from the constraint of Gormenghast, and then people who support it. And you see the clash between these two types of characters. Speaking of characters, the characters of the Gormenghast Trilogy are very fascinating. My favorite would have to be Peake, and Titus Groan was an excellent book to hook me in, because you're mainly following him and his journey navigating through the social hierarchy of Gormenghast. And it's just very fascinating seeing him. He's described as Machiavellian, and just to see him manipulate his way through the castle is just very fun for me. When reading Titus Groan, I remember thinking that a lot of my first time meeting these characters, getting to know them, it felt pretty Lynchian. And when I mean by Lynchian, I'm referring to this feeling where getting to know these characters, I felt like they were funny, like they were humorous. I wanted to laugh, but then they also simultaneously made me felt uneasy. Another thing of note is that these characters aren't stagnant. When you first meet them, another thing you'll know is that they have a quirk. Each of them have a certain quirk to them Like, for instance, Countess Gertrude, she's very quiet. She talks slow. She's very enamored with birds, her cats. You have Dr. Prunesqualler, who has this very hyena laugh to him. Like, he's always giggling and laughing. Like, they each have like a quirk to them that, you know, contributes to the uneasiness, I'd say, at least for me. As each of them are going through their own little separate trials, how they interact with the major plot points of the story, you do see more depth to their characters. And I think, once again, just incredibly impressive from Peake. One bit of information I feel you should take with you when you're getting into the Gormenghast Trilogy is that this is never meant to be a trilogy. Mervyn Peake envisioned this to be more of, you know, a longer series where we're following Titus grown from when he's a baby to when he's just, you know, a fully fledged adult. Unfortunately, from the start of the 50s and onwards, Mervyn Peake was showing signs of dementia. And during the 50s, during that period in the 50s, he was being institutionalized. His health was in decline. And we're very lucky that we even got Titus Alone, the third book, to begin with. I will let you know right away that Titus Alone is not on the same caliber as Titus Grown and Gormenghast, which is understandable because Mervyn Peake was just not operating at the same mental capacity as he was when he wrote the first two books. Titus Alone feels like a very well-written outline. Like, you can see that Mervyn Peake managed to get the major plot points he wanted to have down, but in terms of fleshing them out, it's not on the same level as Titus Grown and Gormenghast. And after Titus Alone's publication, you know, Peake's health just deteriorated even more so. However, despite that, he was still trying to continue the series as much as he was able to. I mean, he managed to write a fragment and a couple of notes down for what was going to be the next book in the series, Titus Awakes. In fact, Maeve Gilmore, who is the widow of Mervyn Peake, wrote a book, Titus Awakes, that is based off of the fragments that Mervyn Peake left behind. So, yeah, even in his state, he still had this desire to convey his vision of what he had for the Gormenghast series, but alas, we only have the trilogy. So, just letting you know, that's just a bit of information that I feel would be very helpful when you get into the Gormenghast Trilogy and kind of set up your expectations for Titus Alone. However, even if we will never get the complete vision that Mervyn Peake had for Gormenghast, I still consider this to be a new favorite series of mine. You know, Titus Grown and Gormenghast just blew me away. Even Titus Alone, which the majority of people have waning affection for, I still really appreciate it. I mean, for what Mervyn Peake was still able to achieve, to write down while, you know, showing signs of dementia, I enjoyed it. After reading Titus Grown, I had to wait like nearly a week for the second book to arrive, and I just felt so antsy. I was just, I need it, I want it now. And that type of feeling is what I'm looking for when it comes to a series. For those of you who have read the Gormenghast Trilogy and might be interested in more of my spoilery thoughts on each book, I highly recommend that you check out She Was Only Evie. Her channel I will link down below. Evie from She Was Only Evie, we've been having discussions on each book, Titus Grown, Gormenghast, Titus Alone. We even talked about Titus Awakes. So if you want to know my thoughts on certain details, certain plot points of the story, certain characters, go check out her channel and check out those videos. So thank you everyone for stopping by, clicking on this video. I hope I encouraged you, convinced you to check out the Gormenghast Trilogy. I definitely think that this is a great series for those of you who are like me, who are mainly classic readers and you want a good sort of gateway series into fantasy. I would recommend the Gormenghast Trilogy. Very reminiscent, I would say, of like the Victorian, like 19th century classics for sure. So yeah, thank you for stopping by. Please let me know down in the comments if you have read this trilogy, if you plan on reading this trilogy. You know, I'm always game for having a conversation in the comments, and I will see you in the next video, whenever that will be. Bye!